and a talk and conversation with Mr. Williams and his son, Leonard Riddles. April the 24th, 1975, at this museum. This is for the preservation of the souls of the pioneers as requested by the state. Mr. Williams, I understand that you have written a book about the Comanches. Would you like to tell us about it?
Well, I don't know anything to tell. Now, the title, I'll give you the title. The title is Brave Men Die Young. The subtitle is The Comanche Struggle to Survival.
Mm-hmm. Well, when did you start writing this book?
Oh, I started another 10 years ago when I get through with the open arms thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now that Brave Men Die Young, that's a new Comanche slogan, because Indian warriors, they didn't expect to get old, and they rarely did. They all expected to die young on kind of the life they lived, and then as they get their pace. And if anybody got old, he was just lucky.
Tell me about how long have you lived here in Duncan?
In Duncan?
Uh-huh.
I've been around here for about 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I lived east of Comanche for years, ever since, been in this county ever since 1903.
1903. When did you first know Leonard Riddles?
Let's see, 1929.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember most about Mr. Riddles?
About him?
About him. Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Yeah, about Leonard.
Well, he's an ornery kid. Well, he was 11 years old when I first saw him. He's the oldest of the family.
And how many other children were there?
They were 6 in all, 5 beside Leonard, 3 girls, and 1 boy beside him.
And you were his foster parents then, were you?
His father were living, you see, his mother had died just about a week before we went out there. And I had seen his father before, but I didn't know him. But my wife had known him when she was just a girl. And we went out by there and didn't know anything about all this getting along. She hadn't seen him in years. And we found this out, that Leonard's mother had just died, and all the kids had the measles, and they were all sick. But his father, he was a good man and did the best he could, but he was just completely lost. And he said with a bunch of kids, and he didn't know what to do. Well, we just come by there to visit, and we stayed 17 years.
You stayed 17 years, or did they stay 17 years with you? Did they stay with you the 17 years?
Yeah, they said they got drawn. They graduated from high school and began to get away. Leonard and his older sister, his 2 older sisters were married when I left there.
Well, Mr. Riddles, what do you remember about your childhood from 11 years old on?
Well, just like he said, I guess I was pretty ornery. After they came there, I was like any other kid, going to school, going to grade school, and of course I was always interested in art, doing artwork. Sketches, I was doing mostly sketches at that time. That's about all I did, I guess, when I went to school. I just sat there and sketched all through every day, and I'd run through one of those nickel tablets or 10-cent tablets every week. And I don't know how many times I've stayed in the 3rd grade and the 4th and the 5th grade, and finally they...
You didn't go to school until we come there only just a month or 2 at a time.
Yeah.
I've seen you with a stub pencil and 2 or 3 inches long with any kind of a scrap of paper you could get a hold of. Drawing. Used to draw horses. That was main thing he's doing right now, he can draw the most exact picture of a horse that I've ever seen.
Where did you go to school then after you got out of grade school?
I went to Fort Sill Indian School after I finished grade school, and I picked up some art there. And about that time, that first year that I got in there, no, it was on the second year, they sent a fellow down from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They hired him to come down there and teach the Indian artists different media and paint. And he was a Swedish artist. So that was real interesting to me, and after I finished school there, then I went on to, we did murals there in Secco and Fresco. And then after we finished the paintings in the gymnasium there, where they sent me and another boy to Riverside Indian School. That's in Anadarko, north of Anadarko, about a couple of miles. And we did all the murals in the gymnasium there, me and Cecil Murdoch. And then, of course, after that, then that was whenever we finished up. That was in 1941, and of course, a lot of the boys were going into the service then, and I ended up going into the service.
Are those murals still over there?
No, ma'am. They painted them over.
They painted them over.
They wanted me, it was a few years back, to come up there and retouch them and see what kind of a price arrangement that we could make. And I told them labor, then common labor, I think, was about $2.50 an hour. And I hated to see the painting, they need to be retouched, because of basketball hitting, bouncing on that. And I told the superintendent there, I said I'd do it for $2.50 an hour. I wanted to see that they were preserved. And I guess he thought it was too much. I never did hear. Next time I was up around there where the whole gymnasium was painted, just completely painted white. They had painted over all of those, and also at the Riverside Indian School. And they've been trying to get someone in there to take the paintings, try to take that paint off them there, to get them restored back. But they haven't reached any conclusion yet on that. So I don't know what they'll do about that.
How would you go about restoring them? How would you have just painted over them, or?
Oh, you mean whenever they asked me for that? Well, I knew what kind of paint that we used, and I told them that if they'd send to New York and get the powdered paint, what it is, and I'd give them the list of colors and to get this, and then I'd retouch that because I knew the colors that was used in there.
Did you mix very much white with your colors when you were making the fresco paintings, or did you use the pure colors?
We used some white. They didn't really have white. What it was is lime. We used the lime for white, but we did use a little in there.
Have you done any more murals or fresco painting?
I haven't done any of that since then. Of course, I still know how to do it. I can do that.
Is there any way to preserve those fresco paintings?
Well, the type of paintings that they have there is secco. There's two. There's one they call secco. Now that's you put that on, and then you paint on there after it's dry. And now the fresco is whenever you only put what you figure you can paint before it starts setting up too quick. So what the walls there in the Fort Sill Indian School gymnasium is secco, and also at Riverside Indian School. I don't know whether they can. I imagine they can take those. I imagine they can take the paints off, but I don't know how to do that. That's something different. I don't know the type of paint that they covered it with, and that would take somebody that's more or less an expert at that in that type of field. I wouldn't know how to take that off.
Did you ever see any of A.C. Blue Eagle's murals painted?
I've seen some of his in oils in different places.
Mm-hmm.
And Spencer Aces, all those older artists.
Mm-hmm. Did you know any of them personally?
Oh yes, we worked there together at Fort Linden School.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer Asa, Steve Mopuk, James Orchai, Jack Hokie that was there for a while when I first arrived, but he left, and then others came in and worked on those paintings with Alan Hauser.
Mm-hmm.
Cecil Murdoch was there, and a fellow by the name of Pippion. Quite a few of them are dead now.
Mm-hmm.
Not very many of them left. Alan Hauser is still living, and of course myself, I was the youngest one of the group. And Woody Trumbull came down from the University of Oklahoma for a while. He's another artist. But he only came down since, I guess he was going at the university at that time, and he didn't really get, he more or less came down to see what was, how we were using the mediums and all of that. So he didn't get involved in it too much.
Mm-hmm. What do you like to paint the most now? I know Mr. Williams said you like to paint horses, but I've seen some of your works, and I know that you do quite a bit of Indian legend reproductions too.
Well, like he says, I like to draw horses, and I was, raised up on a farm, and naturally there was always horses around, saddle horses and work horses and that type of thing. And it always fascinated me, the muscle structure of the horse and all of this and that. And of course, the horse is something that people of civilization has used for thousands of years, and so that's one of the things I like to draw, of course, horses. But as far as art concerned with the Indians, I'm mostly stuck with the Comanches, since I am half Comanche, and I do all of my work is more on the historical, it covers their costumes and their customs and things like that, their ceremonials and their dances, and of course the horse is always involved in there also.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any titles that you remember definitely of some of your paintings? I know I've seen the mesquite picker.
Oh, picking the mesquite beans.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they have one of mine in the arts and crafts in Washington, D.C. in their permanent collection. Well, they have about 2 or 3, I think, but they have one large one that are picking the mesquite beans.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur Silverman, a private collector, has another one that's picking persimmons, I think it is. And then I had some, picking grapes and different things.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
I'm going to stop this. Mr. Williams, what can you tell me about the legend of the supreme being or the great spirit that believed in?
The great spirit, the so-called now, that wasn't their real name for it, but that's the universal name that it's called. After he had created all the other animals, he created man, and he called the animals up, just like the Bible goes, something like that. And he told them that they must all bow down to man, that he was over them all. All did that except one. And one of this creation refused to bow to man, and now he never had a body. He's just a spirit that roams, and he gets into all the things that torment man, like that sting and bite and everything, like snakes and fleas, insects, wolves, and all things like that. And he's the only one that doesn't have a body. All other things, they're created, will be just like man. They die, and but they believe in reincarnation. At some time, man and these other things will come back to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like when a man dies, they don't have any place of torment. And they believe that after death, they will go to what's commonly called the happy hunting ground. I never heard any one of them call it that, but then and there everything will be joy and happiness and peace, and he'll live there among his friends, but not forever. Eventually, he will be reborn and come back for another cycle on earth, just like he did before. And that's the way they think that eternity is. That it'll go around in the cycle.
Mm-hmm. Leonard, have you ever painted any, the modern type of paintings where they depict the spirit of the great spirit, or any of the signs that they've used?
No, mostly I've painted burial scenes, like that. Yes, involving. I painted one time where the warrior was, where they put him there at the burial on the rack, had a rack there. And then I had the warrior on the horse, going up in the air.
Mm-hmm. What other legends have you used to paint from? Are there any other true stories that you may have used?
Quite a few. I even get, sometimes I'll get a painting, an idea even from a song, a war song, and ceremonials. I get a lot of those stories from those old people. Quite a few of them are gone now, but a lot of those stories are just like going to school. You go to school and learn things. But back then, when I was small, we'd sit around and our grandfathers would tell us all kinds of stories about the Indian legends and war battles and things of that sort.
Mm-hmm. Who was your grandfather?
My grandfather's name was Motemi.
Oh. Well, where do you get the name Black Moon?
The Black Moon, I used to use Leonard Riddles on my paintings, but it didn't go good. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to pick an Indian name to put on my use instead of Leonard Riddles. I have an Indian name, all right, which my grandfather gave me and called me Apide. But I don't know what I don't really know what it means, and it's hard to spell, hard to pronounce. So I thought I'd get something pretty simple. So my great-grandfather on my mother's side was named Black Moon. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, that would be a good name to use. So I started using Black Moon, so I don't have any trouble now on my paintings.
No.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
You see Black Moon on there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of those artists and collectors where they only know me as Black Moon, and but I get mail in both ways. Sometimes I get mail, coming in Black Moon, and either way, Leonard Riddles reaches me. I just got a letter this morning, and it had Black Moon on there.
Well, let's go back and talk about your book a little bit. I know Mr. Riddles is supposed to be working on some illustrations for it. Is that, how far along are you getting with that now?
Well, I have just about half of them, I guess, completed. I have them practically all sketched out, but I don't have them inked in. I have about half of them inked in, and part of them already sketched out.
Do you have any time that you think you'll get this finished so that you can submit it to the publishers?
Well, it won't be long now.
Mm-hmm.
We have no set time.
Mm-hmm.
Really, we haven't been in such a big rush about it. We've been taking our time and trying to get this thing worked out, you know, real good and put out a good book.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is, times are getting rougher on that publishing nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling him that we couldn't be as lucky as D. Brown was when I wrote that "Where My Heart Has Wounded Me." You heard of that?
Yeah.
You see, D. Brown wrote that book, and it's a good one. Have you ever read it?
Yes, pardon.
Yeah, it's a good book, and it's a selling well. But they had that. Right when they were selling well, they had that trouble of a wounded knee. And that boosted that thing, and it made D. Brown a millionaire.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't be that lucky.
No. No. What's the theme of the book? Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the stories that you've used?
Well, really, it's the Indian story out of their own mouth. I don't use history or recorded history for anything except to verify dates and certain things. That's the only way. What right historians have said about it, I don't use. It's what the Indians say, and the Indians' interpretation of what happened in their relation to the white man is right opposite to his, and they're both probably prejudiced to their own side as far as that's concerned. But I'm telling his story, and I go back as far as the Comanche legends go back to his first appearance on the plains. Now, when you go to reading history, the writers, they nearly all began with the Indians coming onto the plains in 1800. And they say they can't come from the north. The Indians say they came from the opposite direction, from the south. And instead of 1800, they say that long ago, probably in the early part of the Christian area, that they were living north of the Rio Grande in southwest Texas at that time, at that early date. Well, they were driven there from stronger forces further south. Well, they left there, and these forces kept crowding up, and the Shoshone, that's what it was at first, because they are an offshoot of the Shoshone. They were crowded up until they finally left there and took a long trek north, following the east edge of the Great Plains, and they went up to near the Great Lakes. There they turned northeast, skirting the lakes, and went northeast to the Atlantic Ocean in New York State, or probably New York State. They don't know exactly what. They couldn't go any further east, and they didn't want to go any further north on account of the climate. But after living there for a certain time, they retraced their steps, come right back, took a backtrack until they got near the Great Lakes. And there they stopped for a rest, and they had a consultation, or a council, about where they would go. And the older ones said that it was too dangerous to try to go back where they came from. That the country had filled up, and because this had been years on the road, the country had filled up, and there would be warring tribes, and they were not strong enough to go back. But a young chief called Gray Wolf, he disagreed. And he said that he had rather die fighting for our homeland is to be forever on the move, and that he was going back. Well, a lot of the bolder ones sided with him, and so he took almost half of the tribe. It had grown then to be quite large. They followed him, and he started back to where they came from, down to southwest Texas. And of course, they began to drop off as they come down there in small bands and scattered out over the country. Well, they went right back to the San Saba River country in southwest Texas, and that was the center of the stronghold of that tribe in that country. And they were lost to this northern bunch for nearly 300 years. There wasn't much traffic or knowledge, one not having knowledge of the other. And this tribe, they went back and whipped the Apaches back and took possession of their place. And that's the segment of the tribe that the Spaniards had the trouble with, because it was just north of the Rio Grande, and that's ones that they fought. Well, while they were doing this, the northern band, they moved up west of the Missouri River and settled on the Loup River between the Platte and the Missouri. And they lived there for years and prospered, but they finally, the other tribes, especially the Dakotas from the north and the Kiowas, pressed down from the north, the Cheyennes and other tribes from the east, and they all wanted this country, from the colder climate down there. Well, they held their own all right, but in the meantime, life had been easier there, and they fell into a rut of no fighting, no conquest or anything, and taking life easier. Well, the bolder ones of the bunch, they became dissatisfied, and strong leaders began to draw off, and they would take small bunches with them, and these scattered out over the country. And then, when the Indians from the east, long after the discovery of America, Indians were driven from the east, they had firearms, and their firearms, that the Indians had never seen those. Well, they would kill Indians further than bows and arrows, and they scared the game off, and they made it tougher and tougher for them to exist there. And with their best fighting men being gone in smaller bunches, it left them partly unprotected. And they were finally forced to move to the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming. And from there, they scattered over Idaho and southern Wyoming, northern Utah, and all in there, until later, that began to crowd up, and they had by this time become partly mounted horsemen, and could travel further, and they began to come south, and as they come south, they met those other Comanches that were further down, come back and tell stories about a better climate, an abundance of buffalo and wild horses just for the taking, and the people up there began to be dissatisfied, because hunting up there in the wintertime was almost non-existent. There was a saying among them that late winter was the time that children cried for food, because they couldn't support them all. Bands began to break off from up there and come down to the Colorado River in southeastern Colorado, and they settled there. And gradually, they had different reasons for breaking away, but they come and they settled on the Colorado, on the Arkansas, and on the South Platte, and as far down as old Taos, New Mexico. Well, there's where the Spaniards got to knowing the northern bunch, and they gradually came from there onto the plains, and then sooner or later the whole bunch was organized. They're not organized, but got together, and so I take all that up, and then I begin telling about their life on the plains, and their life in the camps, how the camps was made, and the society of the camps, and like that. And their buffalo hunts, and their horsemanship, and things like that, and on up to their wars, and the first settlement of the first whites, the Anglo-Americans that came east, west, their contact with them, how that came about, and the colonization of Texas by Austin and other impresarios, as the Spaniards call it, taking great gobs of their land. Well, their wars with all of them, and from there on up, then, of course, it's, well, a lot's been written about that, you know, but then, of course, mine differs because it's really sort of the same thing, but just from a different angle. And then about the Indian chiefs, leaders, their methods of war, and all of these kind of things, the treaties that are made and broken, what Sam Houston said about treaties, and what General W.S. Harney said about the treaties. Sam Houston said years after he was president of Texas, before he died, see, he knew Indians as well as anybody because he had known them all his life. And Sam Houston said that he had never known an Indian to be the first to break a treaty. And he said, white men break it before the ink's dry. That was his. Well, later on, the Treaty of Medicine Lodge, General William S. Harney said up there, he says, I've been on this frontier for 40 years, and I've never known an Indian chief to break his word. Well, that was pretty good recommendation that they try to stay with it. We know all those treaties were broken, every one that was ever made, except one. There's one treaty made with the Comanches that was never broken. And that was a German colony. They came down southwest Texas, and they made a short agreement, and it was short, plain, easily understood. But they paid for the Indians for the land. They paid for the land. It was a cheap price and all that, but the Indians took it and were satisfied with it. And that treaty has never been broken, never was broken, because the Germans kept it, and the Indians kept it. All the others, even the Medicine Lodge Treaty, has been torn all to pieces. It's been violated in every way that you could think of. Well, I bring all those treaties and the Indian fights down to surrender of the quota. That's was the last bunch, the ones that Quanah Parker led. Well, General McKenzie, you know, they fought Quanah Parker on the plains, and he had got to be commanded at Fort Sill, and all the other Comanche bands had come into the reservation except the quota. And McKenzie, he decided that persuasion would probably be better than force to get them in. And he sent a delegation out headed by Dr. J.J. Strum, a man that had married an Indian woman and had been living with the Comanches. He was a physician, and he'd been living with the Comanches 30 years, and they all trusted him. Well, Strum and this bunch went out, and they met Quota on the White River, and they was out on a buffalo hunt. They went in for a talk, and there was 7 chiefs there. Quanah Parker was the youngest. He wasn't really a chief. He was just a war leader at that time. And the other chiefs all talked with him, but they knew that the thing was about up, and the old way of life was about gone. And Quanah, although he was only 23 years old, he did the talking, probably because he knew English better than the rest of them. And he told them that if they would let them go ahead and finish their hunt, they were out of meat. And if they let them go ahead and finish their hunt unmolested, that he would be responsible for bringing the Indians to the reservation. And, well, they couldn't do otherwise because there's too few of them anyway. But they promised him that he could come and settle anywhere he wanted to on the reservation, do just about as he pleased. So after they finished their hunt, Quanah led this remnant of the Comanches into Fort Sill, and they surrendered, wasn't accompanied by any army or anything. They're the only ones that just came in voluntarily and surrendered without a fight. And the bands that have fought so long, Quanah Parker band, he surrendered 100 warriors, 300 non-combatants, and 1,400 horses. That was what they surrendered, and that was then they were, from there on it's on the reservation, and it tells about the coming to the reservation wasn't the end of their troubles by any means, because they were under the corrupt administration of U.S. Grant. Now, Grant was probably an honest man personally, but he was inept as a politician, and he let corrupt politicians get hold of him, and there was all kinds of dirt, almost as much as has been in this one, in Grant's administration. Well, they gave Comanches a rough time, and I bring it down until the last chapter that is headed the Jerome Remount, and I call it the last big steal. That's after they'd been here on the reservation for years and years, and the government had solemnly promised them that they wouldn't sell any part of the reservation or allow white people on it without the consent of a majority of the adult male Indians. Well, they came up there and they got the Indians up there in an open air council, and they had already made a trade with the 5 civilized tribes to get their surplus land, and they offered $1.25 an acre for all the land in the Comanche reservation except 160 acres that they would allot to each man, woman, and child. Well, Quanah Parker and Tabernanica, another chief, held out for $2.50 an acre. They knew that they couldn't hold it anyhow, that whites was going to take it. But they put it off, and they kept fooling with them, and somehow, later, why, they got it for $1.50. And the Indians then were allotted around about 1900, and that ended the reservation. The reservation was and that's where I stopped, at the end of the reservation period.
I see. Well, do you go into the detail of the adobe wall?
I have the Battle of Adobe Walls, and beside that, The chapter just before that tells of how the Adobe Walls come about, why, and who led it, who led the agitation, and all like that, and then tell all the actual battle of the Adobe Walls. See, that was in 1874. That was the battle of Adobe Walls. And Quanah Parker surrendered on the 2nd of June, 1875. A year later, year after the Battle of the Adobe Walls. But here's another thing that this very little of it's in history. It's there all right if you know where to get it. This Adobe Walls that they always talk about was the second battle involving that thing. Just 10 years before, in 1864, Colonel Kit Carson, the famous frontiersman, led an army of New Mexico volunteers and to conquer the Kiowas and Comanches. The Kiowas and Comanches come up. The Comanches come first up to this old fort that had been built by Colonel William Bent. Had been standing for years and years empty. And the Indians used it in bad weather sometimes to take protection from the bad weather. Well, the Comanches came up there and camped on a little creek just north of the Canadian, near these walls. And the Kiowas come along later, and they found the Comanches already camped there, and they went up the creek about 5 miles, and camped. Well, they were there when Kit Carson and the army came across. Well, just about a mile north of the main Kiowa camp was a camp of Kiowas of old Indians blinded by trachoma and crippled ones. Those unable to fight was in the camp to themselves. So Kit Carson's bunch come in and they attacked this camp first. It was undefended. But Charleston, the old Kiowa chief, happened to be up there. Well, they butchered those. Well, he got on his horse and rode down to the main camp, told them what was going on, and then he rode on to the Comanche camp to tell Bull Bear, the leader of the Comanches, about it. Well, when he got down there, Bull Bear, the Comanches had already heard the shooting and had their horses caught up and was waiting to see what happened. And when the Kiowa chief came down and told them what was up, well, he gave orders for them to mount their ponies and go to battle. There, in that battle, they whipped the army under Kit Carson, and that's one time that they had a fair chance, and they beat Kit Carson said later. Well, he said in talking about it, he said they licked hell out of us. That's the way he put it. Mm-hmm. And he said it would take an army of 1,000 men to hold that Adobe Walls building. And so there never was anything done about it. And this last fight that's so much talked about was very small compared to the first one. Mm-hmm. But the Indians lost there, so it's in history, and they don't say very much about the first one. Mm-hmm. When there was 5 or 6 times the amount of people engaged. There's not very much said about that. Mm-hmm. Kit Carson and the biography of Kit Carson, it tells of it, and some other places. But I don't know why, but they passed over those things.
Mm-hmm. Well,
what was the division among the Comanches at the time of the Battle of Adobe?
Well, there wasn't any really until then. That's where it started. The schism between in the tribe was started by Ishitai. The Ishitai and Quanah were both young men. Ishitai about 5 or 6 years older, but he got to be a medicine man, and he was an extraordinary man. There's not any question about that. He had ability, but he made the people. He was trying to be the overall chief. Quanah at that time was not a chief. He had been a war leader and under Bull Bear, the chief of the quarter. But Ishitai claimed to be a prophet and telling what they could do, and he had direct communication with the Great Spirit. Well, the older people, the real old ones, and the women mostly, they believed him. Well, he worked up this scheme to get all the Comanches into one bunch. You see, they had never fought as a unit in all their lives. Separate bands were all independent. And he got some of the Cheyennes and a few Kiowas worked up to join him in. And on the meeting on Elk Creek, they held a meeting over there it lasted over a week. And some Cheyennes and some Kiowas come down, and most of the Comanches. And Ishitai preaching his doctrine, he got the Cheyennes were right in for it, and some of the Kiowas, well, the Comanches began to break away. Old Horseback, he led his band back to the Wichita Mountains. And Pennsatukas, they left, but the rest of them stayed, and they held a council about what they were going to do. And some of them first wanted to go out and exterminate the Tonka Walls. And the older chiefs told them that wouldn't do. That's just exactly what the army would be expecting. And then they decided to attack this Adobe Walls, because there had a bunch of buffalo hunters that was making that headquarters for the buffalo hunting on the plains. And 3 buffalo hunters. Well, there's a half-breed scout that had told these men that owned this store that the Comanches would attack them in June. And they knew they were coming, and he told them that he would tell them, notify them when the attack would take place. Well, the Indians in council, they decided to attack this place, and they were 5 Cheyenne war chiefs there, and 3 Kiowa war chiefs, and 5 Comanche war chiefs. But they unanimously elected Quanah as the commander-in-chief of the attacking party. Well, he didn't want to do it. He had argued against it all the time and told them that it was useless, that there were too many white people, and if they killed all the people out there at Adobe Walls, that the army would just come on them in such hordes that they couldn't compete with them. And he was against it, but they were going ahead any time. Ishitai and never kept boosting this up and so. Quanah, he very reluctantly finally agreed to lead, the party. And that's how it came him to lead. Well, in this party, Ishitai had promised them that the white men's bullets would fall down like mud balls, and nobody would get hurt, nobody would get killed. Well, there was a large bunch of these Indians went, but there were only about 100 took part in the battle. The others, older warriors and older chiefs, just went along to see if his medicine was going to work and how it go. Well, when the bullets began to kill the Indians, well, they saw that it wouldn't work. Ishitai, he was off a mile away, sitting with his naked body painted with yellow paint and sitting on his horse out of any danger. And a Cheyenne Indian that his son had been killed in the battle went down and told Ishitai that if he wasn't afraid to come up and get the body of his son, and old Ishitai just sat there. Well, after the battle was lost, and of course I go into more detail about the battle, but after the battle was lost, these young men that were in the fight, they fell onto Ishitai with their quirks and would have beat him to death probably, but older heads intervened and talked them out of it. And there they named him the name that he carried the rest of his life. His real name was White Eagle, and they named him Ishitai. Well, he blamed Quanah for his failure because Quanah never did believe him when he began to first tell these things. He didn't believe in him, and there was a coolness between them. Quanah didn't pay any attention to him, but he told it and got all the followers he could, and he told everything in the world that he could get against Quanah. He even put it out that Quanah didn't have a drop of white blood in him.
Comanche.
Well, Comanche, I didn't have a drop of Comanche blood in him. And that got all over the country. Leonard's father-in-law, when he died, he didn't believe. He was an Ishitai follower. He didn't believe. He's told me half a dozen times that he didn't have a drop of it. But that has been threshed out. The government investigated it, and then the older heads, this Herman Lehman, I suppose you've heard of.
Yes.
It was a white captive. He lived with Quanah for a time after he come to Comanches, and he says that there was no doubt that Pichon Quanah was Quanah's father, and that he was half Comanche. But anyhow, that faction grew up among the Indians, and Quanah just ignored Ishitai, and but Ishitai did all the devilment he could against Quanah, but he was in the minority, and the old thing is just about fading out. It's fading here now. Now, it's a funny thing that, as I said, Leonard's father-in-law, he was for Ishitai, but his grandfather-in-law on his mother's side, Joshua, he was a strong Quanah man.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you don't hear much about it anymore.
No.
But that's how it all came about. Was over Ishitai's medicine prophecies.
Did you know Herman?
His failure to get them to follow him.
Did you know Herman Lehman? Had you
No,
ever heard
I've
him
seen him.
speak?
You know, he lived here in Duncan 2 years. That was before my time.
Mm-hmm.
Duncan Indian Territory. Got his mail here.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen him a couple of times, but I didn't know him. I was very small when I saw him.
We had his
No.
warrior uniform here.
No.
His grandson in Marlow.
No.
That is
No.
show it.
I've seen Ishitai, I guess, 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen him a lot of times. And I remember seeing Quanah 3 times. He once made a speech down here at this old Comanche carnival, but I was only about 17 years old and wasn't interested in anything like that, and didn't pay any attention to which I had now. But then I saw him once in Lawton, and I saw him once here in Duncan, and that's all I know about those. I've seen Geronimo several times. See, Geronimo died in 1909, Quano died in 1911. Ishitai died in 1917, and I was a good big boy when that happened.
Bill, do you have any questions you'd like to ask them while we've got them here? It might be that...
Yeah, all the Plains Indians, when they hunted, when the Plains Indians hunted, like killing a buffalo or a deer, didn't they use nearly, they didn't waste any of the animal hardly, did they?
No, the Comanches were the first conservationists in this country. They never cut down a tree or uprooted a blade of grass without it was necessary. They never dammed a running stream, and they never killed an animal except for food and clothing, and then only what was needed, because they believed that they were just a part of nature, and these other people, that these other things were the same. That the Indians and all the animals were all just part of nature, and so and the buffalo was put here for the Indians' use, and he didn't waste it. They used every bit of the animal. You see, they used the hide for clothing and robes. The hoofs and horns were made into ornaments, and then they boiled a strong glue that they've never found anybody never found anything any stronger, but boiling the hoofs and horns down to a glue. They used that for a glue, and they used everything but the heart. And they wouldn't use the heart because that would, in years yet to come, that would be in another buffalo that would come here. That was their peculiar belief. That heart was not destroyed, but they used that, even the buffalo chips for fuel. So
where did the Indians get their first dogs? Do you have any idea?
The dogs?
Yeah.
I don't know. I get from all of my reading, I suppose the dog was about the first animal ever tamed, and I don't know, and I've never heard how they got the first dog.
Well, we know the Plains Indians migrated, I guess, for game and so forth. How far south did they actually drift, Mr. Williams?
I was telling her at the start of this, the Comanches, his story, where they come from, is in direct opposition to what most historians write. That most historians say the Comanches came down from the north, and they were a mountain people, and had to get used to the plains when they come here. The Comanches say that they were driven north of the Rio Grande River into southwest Texas by stronger bands about the beginning of the Christian era, that's nearly 2,000 years ago, and that was their first coming to North America. And there's facts that bear that out too. That not just only the Indian story, but I have that written in the book about the things that corroborate the Indians' part of the story. They did drift north. They went north later on, but then finally about half of the tribe came back, and they came back right to where they started from, and they settled in the San Saba River country in southwest Texas. And this other part stayed in the north until 300 or 400 years later. And then they came down from the north out of Wyoming and Idaho, down into there. And most historians start writing when they came down and started and took possession of the north of the plains. But these Comanches, they don't have. That's as far back as I could go was their coming on, being driven. It's bound to have been out of Mexico because they say they were driven across the Rio Grande in southwest Texas. Well, it couldn't have been anywhere else but Mexico. And another thing that shows that the Comanche, some of the Comanche religious belief is a lot like the Mayan belief in Yucatan. Same like that. It's a lot like it. For instance, there's an old tradition that's forgotten by most all the living Comanches now. Let's say that ages and ages ago that there was a white god that came down to the Indians, and they and taught them better ways of living and things like that. Well, and the way that they tell it, it just coincides with what's the quote, the god of the Mayas, just the same way. There's that much of it. It just one corroborates it. So
How did one become a chief? Was it by blood or
the Comanches were unique about that. Leonard could tell you that as well as I could, but I guess I know as much about that part of it as he does too. The Comanches were unique among Indians in the way that a man got to be a chief. He wasn't elected. There was no hereditary chief. He didn't inherit the job. He wasn't elected or anything of the kind. He got, you ask an old Indian how he got to be chief, and say he just got that way. Mm-hmm. A man became a chief by his own ability, by his intelligence and good management, or by his record in war, his bravery and his strategic ability to lead. And he got a following, and they followed him voluntarily. But another thing about it, there's no Comanche chief that could force any Indian, any Comanche to do anything. Every man was absolutely independent. He followed the chief just because he wanted to, not because he had to. He followed him because he thought that he was better qualified to lead than he was to go on his own. And the difference in white soldiers and the Indians, the Comanche chief actually led. He didn't sit back here and say, go on. He said, follow me. And he took the lead. And they're riding it, you know, you heard about they went in single file, how they ride in single file. Well, the chief was always in the lead of that file, right up in the bunch. And he was so marked some way, had some kind of a distinguishing feathers or something on him that the others could tell where he was all the time. Well, they'd come in here, they would ride in and out.
This is a continuation of a tape with Leonard Riddles tape and Leonard Riddles.
To that fire, right up in the bunch, and he was so marked some way, had some kind of a distinguishing feathers or something on him that the others could tell where he was all the time. Well, they'd come in here, they would ride in and out. In the beginning, you know, the white people used to have those muzzle-loading guns. Well, they'd ride just out of range of fire until they loaded, until the whites fired, and then ride in and discharge their arrows, ride out again, and that way. Well, the chief always done that. He told the warriors, do as I do. And they followed him and did that. That's one of the reasons that they were saying was that the Comanches were none of the war chiefs ever lived to be old because it took a brave man. A man had to show his bravery before he was a chief, his own personal bravery. And so he wouldn't have been a chief if it hadn't have been for that, and he was right up in front. And that's the way they got to be a chief. There was no elections or no hereditary. An Indian chief's son wasn't any more than any other Comanche.
Now then, what was the duties and functions actually of a medicine man?
Huh?
What was the duties and the functions of a medicine man?
Well, a medicine man had two duties. He was a spiritual leader, just like your pastor of a church is a spiritual leader of his flock, you know. Well, he was a spiritual leader then, and told them all about the things of the Great Spirit and things like that, and leader of that, as well as a physician. And now, most all medicine men were intelligent men. They were pretty smart. Most of them knew that a lot of their stuff was hocus pocus, all right. But they had remedies that modern medicine hasn't never found a way to do any better. For instance, in mending broken bones, you never saw an Indian that was walking around with a crooked leg and crippled like that and everything. In mending broken bones and in curing gunshot and gunshot and knife wounds, they've never had a superior, and they use natural medicines. One of their remedies for curing a fresh wound is this old bear grass. You know this, what we call not bear grass, but prickly pear. You know these old thick, heavy leaves that are thorny? They take that and singe the thorns off and pound that heavy leaf into a poultice and apply that poultice. That's one of their remedies for curing gunshot and knife wounds. And they had other remedies different remedies for different things. They had quite a knowledge of medicine, because it began we don't know how many thousands of years ago, and every medicine man before he died, he was jealous of his knowledge until about the end, but he always passed his power, as he called it, on to somebody else younger, and to give him all the knowledge that he had. Well, this gradually kept accumulating for thousands and thousands of years, and it's bound to have got better. And that's the way that all the progress is just passed on and added to new things. And they had remedies for every known thing. Now, the greatest benefit is pneumonia and tuberculosis and trachoma. They never found any cure for that. They never did do anything with that. Smallpox killed a lot of them, but they never heard of that until this country was discovered. But so the medicine man, some of them had more power than the actual chiefs. Like you read back in history, Tecumseh was a medicine man way back there in early American history. He was a medicine man. Sitting Bull wasn't a chief; he was a medicine man, and he's the one that he got all the Sioux together, like Issachar tried to get the Comanches together, and he appointed Crazy Horse as commander-in-chief of the Sioux. And at the battle of the Little Bighorn, Sitting Bull sitting in the door of his teepee and watched the battle up on the side of the hill. He was crippled. He'd got crippled as a warrior in younger days, and he got crippled in the foot. And so medicine men like that, they had more influence probably than the actual chief. Among the chiefs, they had a war chief. The Comanches had a war chief and a peace chief. And one was independent of the other. The war chief was independent of the peace chief, and the peace chief was independent of the war chief. Peace chief is his duty to govern the bands, and see to their welfare, find camping places, get them camped down and things like that, settle disputes. He's great at settling disputes. When some old Indian had come along, some old Indian that had a right young woman, a gray-haired man, and she run off with a younger man, he'd yell for nanawooks, damages. And so if the damages was paid as much as he wanted it would be all right. But if he wanted more than the man that ran off with the woman could pay, it was more than his folks could pay. Of course, he'd run off. Right. And they couldn't pay it. Then they would appeal to the chief, and he would study the thing over, and decide what would be actual damage. They all agreed that he was due damage, and the chief would decide things like that. The piece, that was his job. War chief didn't have anything to do with that.
Well, while I'm thinking about it, what was involved in a courtship when a young man decided he saw a good maiden? What kind? It differed as I told you. There were 5 different divisions, 5 main divisions of the Comanches, and they lived in different parts of the country. Of course, they could all roam all over the Comanche land they wanted to, and was all recognized, and all of them were welcome anywhere. But just naturally, as people will, they just naturally located in different parts, like the Puntupas down in southwest Texas, then came the Nokomis further north, then the Coachella meat eaters, buffalo eaters from that, and the Yaps the furthest north, the quarters northwest in the Panhandle. Well, all of these grew up to having, although they had the same language and everything, there were some things that they varied just a little bit in, like the manner of courtships and things like that. There was some variance, and you can tell what one band did, the others maybe didn't do just exactly like that. Well, the marriage part of it, there was no ceremony there, in that, and no ceremony in divorce. But in the courtships, and in particular, Ben, the quota is lasted the longest, and I go by theirs more than anything else. And one of the ways was that a young fella decided that he'd become enamored of a young girl. He'd go over to her teepee. Family maybe would be in the teepee, the whole family. He'd come in. Well, they all knew what he was coming for, but they pretended to pay no attention to him. He'd just stand there and look. And he'd just look at the girl all the time. And then go out later on. Well, he'd do that several times. No attention paid to him. Finally, after she had decided that she had put him off long enough to satisfy modesty, when he went out, she would come out. And when he did, he grabbed her, and if she didn't resist, why, that is it. And if she did, why, he let loose and didn't pay any more attention to that. And there was another way that among all the tribes, that you see, a father could dispose of his daughters any way he wanted to. He could give them away, or he could sell them, give them to anybody he wanted to. And a man could buy them if he could find a seller. Well, they go up here, and an Indian man, he'd go and offer so many ponies. That is their wealth, you know. Their Comanche wealth is consisted of ponies. Well, he'd go up here, and he'd make an offer. He'd go to the way it was. He wouldn't go and have. He'd tell you his father would go to the girl's father and make an offer. Well, if the girl's father wanted to hold him up, he'd make it higher, you know. Well, they would argue and squabble about it, but if they couldn't settle it, sometimes they'd appeal to the chief, and he would decide on what he thought was a fair deal, what the man was really able to pay, and that way. But now, all Indians didn't do that. There was the majority of the men. They loved their daughters well enough that they didn't force them to do anything they didn't want to, but they could if they wanted to. And among them, it was just like they were greedy ones among them, just like they are among white people now, that would do. For that reason, there was old gray-haired men that might have an old gray-haired wife, and he might have a daughter. I might have a wife 13 years old, because they considered them in marriageable age at puberty. Then about 13, the girl was marriageable age then, you know. Well, he could have them of all ages, you know, and that's where the trouble come in. That's where he's yelling for damages all the time, because naturally those younger ones, well, they wouldn't run away. And they're separating. A man could throw his wife away, get rid of her any time he wanted to, but a woman wasn't allowed to do that. She had to stay with a man regardless. But there was a custom that if he mistreated her in any way, her uncles and her brothers and all of them was expected to take it up, to see that she was treated right, and if they went and killed him for mistreating her, there wasn't anything done about it. So that kept that part of it down pretty well. And they wasn't, but women did believe men, because just like women all over the world and among whites and everybody else, if they didn't want to live with a man, they could find ways to make themselves so obnoxious that he'd want to get rid of them. So that's the way they could make it so rough that he'd want to get rid of them.
Is there anything else you can think of, Bill? Leonard, have you got some more stories you've got to tell?
Oh, I would like to say where we were talking about these different bands. Each one of these bands had their own chief and also their own war chief. And one band,
every band was absolutely independent of the other.
That's where a lot of the treaties were kind of messed up, where the United States
and then another
Army came in and made treaties with one band, and all Comanches ought to stay with that, whereas these other band over here didn't have nothing to do with that treaty was made.
Another thing, and I'm not butting into what he said, but he might not think of it in telling you. You take a war chief, an overall war chief of a band. Well, there was in that band there was a lot of other chiefs, war chiefs, and they were kind of sub chiefs, just like a general will have lieutenants and majors and things like that. So they were sub-chiefs that would take the place of these generals and have these majors and lieutenants and captains and stuff like that. Led other bands, led smaller bands, but they followed the main war chief. These sub-chiefs.
You know where that old place is? Asked for a certain Comanche medicine man, and they tried to outdo one another. They really put up some tricks.
Does Jim's widow, does she have any Visitines paraphernalia that over?
No, he got rid of those.
He did.
They always,
little whistles, eagle bone whistles.
I tried to get a hold of his, all of those relics, and I told him if he ever wanted to sell them, I'd like, get a hold of them. And I wanted to keep them here in Oklahoma, somewhere. And somebody got a hold of Jimmy and talked him into going to Paladuro Canyon in Texas over there, and they got rid of them, all of that. I got a lot of information from
Miss
Jimmy.
Jenkins and I thought maybe sometime we might go out there. Just if she had something, maybe loan it to the museum for a while, but probably wouldn't do any good then.
They won't hardly loan them. Hardly. They'll sell them.
What is it?
A lot of times you see what happens.
Drink out of a gourd dipper.
What happens is, they loan things like that out, and they'd go back to pick them up, and they said, well, you gave them to me. And that kind of ruined things, and some of those things that was pretty dear to them, they'd go to pick them up, and they'd say, well, you gave that to me, 2 years ago. They'd have an argument there, and they just got the word in the argument. The only way you have to buy them, you just come out and buy them. I got a hold of quite a few things like that, but I bought them, and they're still around. These things are still around. You get them and pay them for it, but otherwise they won't be given to some that donate. But what I had to buy it. And I finally collected enough that I finally left the Southern Plains Museum in Arkansas.
Did you keep very many around to use in your paintings?
Well, I know them well enough. I don't have to keep them, just raised up and hear stories about these, the costumes, for instance, I use on my paintings are strictly Comanche. I don't paint any other tribe.
Did you tell me that some of your paintings are in the Smithsonian?
No, not in the Smithsonian. In the arts and crafts, they're permanent collection in Washington, D.C. Another one, Bureau of Indian.
Bureau of Indian.
Arts and crafts. And then, of course, the Southern Plains Museum at Arkansas has some of the things. And then, the relics.
Tell us about the Little Pony Society.
Well, the Little Pony War Society, it's a fighting group of people, warriors, and each band has several different war societies like that. Some bands will have the same, they'll have a leader. And we have the Shield Society, the Spear Society, the Little Pony War Society, the Crow Society, the Wolverine Society, the Dragonfly Society. That's named after the what we call the snake doctor. These that fly over these ponds.
Yeah.
Well, They used to have these dances, the Little Pony dances back there in 19 in the 20s, and then it began to fade out in the 30s, and then they didn't have very many of them, just kind of mixed, all the Kiowas and the Comanches that had these dances. So I was with a group of boys in Apache here a few years back, and we wanted to revive the Little Pony War Society of the Comanche tribe, because at that time they were just calling it the Gourd Dance. So we selected a chairman, so we could carry the thing out, and he led them in the dances.
Do you still dance quite often?
Oh, I don't hardly dance very many. I'm not a dancer. It takes a lot of go to go to these dances.
Yeah.
And, some of those boys go and dance every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. Of course, they're working boys. They work around Lawton and other places, and it just takes a lot of time when you start getting involved in that. I did help them reorganize that, and I painted the emblem for them, the Little Pony War Society emblem, with 4 horses. I think it's 4 horses that I had drawn in there. And this is an old war society, probably organized whenever the Comanches first got a hold of the horses. That's where the name came, Little Pony.
Oh, yeah.
And they saw them on the horses, these warriors, where they began to call them the Little Pony. So they had a leader, something like the chief. He wasn't a chief, he was just a war society leader. And all of these other war societies have leaders like that too. And they worked independent from the war chief that Mr. Williams was talking about. They were out constantly going on raids. And outside of that, besides that, we had Comanche warriors that was just constantly on the move. When you'd every day, there was 2 or 3 going on these raids, coming and going. These were brothers and cousins, close friends. And then some of these war societies they'd send out every week a group that take off. So they must have quite a few in some of these war societies, like the Crow Society. Now, the Crow Society, they had a leader that he wore a cape, a red and black cape. The cape was red on one side and black on the other side. The leader wore this. Only the leader wore it. All the others didn't. And they painted their bodies black, their leggings black, because of the name derived from the bird crow, which has been here a long time. And the Wolverine Society, they got that name from the animal Wolverine, because he's real fierce. And the snake doctor, or the dragonfly, is called War Society. They got that name because of this insect being hard to hit. It's pretty hard to hit, so they use that on their shield.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Riddles and Mr. Williams, for your discussion with us of the Comanche tribal rights, and we hope that you get your book published soon.
Thank you.
I went into Miss Davis's house, a snake. And that was a wonderful thing for me because I very soon came under her dynamic influence. And I had immediately forgot that I wanted to go into sports and all that kind of thing because I'd always liked sports. And I'd jump anyone. And so I got very much interested in drama. And after I'd been there a little while with Miss Davis, I had been telling some of the girls some little Indian stories, little folklore stories, and I didn't understand why they were so interested in something like that, but at some of our little get-togethers, I'd tell these stories. Miss Davis heard about it, and she said, I think it would be good for you to pick up your folklore and do something with that. There were certain times for telling Indian stories, not in the summertime, but after the moon of fallen leaves had come and gone, and the north wind blew cold breath over the land, and the long night came, that was the time for the telling. Usually the crier would go out about the camp in the early morning, and he would shake his rattle, and he would wave his turkey feather fan, and he would call out to his people, hey, hey-ah, 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 oh. You would see those old men stopping that track to listen. And the old women, they would come to their listening each doorway to hear the news of the day. And perhaps he would say, along with the other news that he gave, tonight the storyteller will be at his fire, and everyone is welcome. So, when darkness spread over the land, you would see the people coming from all directions to the storytelling fire. There would sit the storyteller and the one who kept the fire. And the old women would come in and they would sit on one side of the circle and they would spread their blankets because the night would be cold and perhaps would pull their buffalo robes close about them. And then the girls would be there with the women, and on the other side would sit the men on their haunches or crossed legs, and they would make a complete circle around the fire, and after a while, when silence gathered, the storyteller would begin. Listen, my children, I will tell you a story. When the world was yet young, there was but one man upon it. The Great Spirit had sent him down to keep the world company, it looked so lonesome. And the man walked up and down the world, and he was lonesome too. And the Great Spirit, seeing this, sent to the man a son. And the man called his son Laka, meaning time. Father and his son walk up and down the earth all over the face of it. They found it good, but it was too cold. There were no trees to shelter them. There was no wood with which to make fire. There were no grasses and flowers to make the world beautiful. And they talked about this, and one night the young brave had a dream, and he told it to his father. And he said, I think it will be through sacrifice that beauty will walk upon the earth. I will give myself to our Great Spirit, that you may live, and all those who follow. He will send you companions on the trail, and he'll make the world beautiful for man. And the young boy climbed to the top of the tallest mountain, and there he fasted until the ghost called him. And his father buried him on the highest cliff, and from his grave sprang the first pine tree, and people say, if you will listen, you can hear those pine trees murmur, welcome, welcome, welcome. It is luck according to his people. And they say, if you have any trouble, and you tell them to the pine trees, they will always comfort you. And that is the end of the story. About this time, I met Sir Louis Ranch, who, the composer of Indian music, and he had been told that I did some very lovely Indian programs. And so he came down to see me at Chicago and wanted to know if I would consider going on a summer circuit of Chautauqua. And he told me what Chautauqua was, and that he'd have two other Indian girls with me, and he'd build a program around what I could do, and I would be the center of this program. And I decided to try it. I thought this would be a great occasion, and my father wasn't pleased. He wasn't exactly carried away with the idea because I'd always been a protective Indian girl, but he knew I didn't talk with strangers very much and everything, so he decided I could go. And
so the two big buildings, he gave one of those big buildings to the Boy Scouts and gave that ranch. That's the head of the world of the United States out there in New Mexico to the Boy Scouts, and gave them that building to maintain it, if you will. And he left it full with cattle and everything. So Frank Phillips, and then when he got out to California, he did take whether $1 million or $5 million. He took a lot of money out there, and he became a public citizen after he got to California. And he bought some land around Los Angeles that turned him out more money than he ever had gotten before. It just flipped up on him, and he became a public citizen in California. Wade Phillips has done everything that he hadn't done. He always felt that he shirked his duties of not working for the public. But he got to California, he went to work with that. He just kept an office.
Well, of course, it was on the upgrade during the time that he went there. When was it in the 20s?
Well, it was a little later than that. It's near 30.
30.
Yes, it's 30.
But people flocked in there at about that time by the millions.
Well, every piece of land, I have some other friends out there who they built it up there fortunately. Sure, big piece of land out around there too. But Waite made more money if he ever made that 25 million. He made more money than that company in California.
Did all right.
And they had another brother lived at Tulsa, but they all came from Lucinda, Iowa, and Frank was the only barber. He was the oldest one of them. And he nursed the rest of them in there. Well, I want to say that they didn't cost him money. Both his brothers made good, all right.
Pulled their own weight.
But he carried them for quite a while. Let them work for him. So I called Bill, and I called Bill Shelley, one of the gentlemen of all time. And he always was calm, and he had enough love in that big system of his to take care of the world.
Well, did you ever have much acquaintance with Mr. Sinclair?
Well, I only see Harry Sinclair originated up in Kansas there, and was tangled up in a drugstore as a younger fellow. And when the Cushing Pool came in, he tied in with a fellow by the name of White. White and Sinclair happened to be there. And they got into production at Cushing. And from there, they later kind of went off different routes. And Sinclair formed the Sinclair Oil and Gas Company. And he had a great geologist by the name of Bush that stayed close to him. I'd say that he wasn't a fellow that you would really want to get real close to, because I met him and knew him, and I could go to St. Clair office and get their geology on it. If they get a wildcat well, I could get everything they had from their geologist and vice president of information. But that would mean always that I mustn't, if anybody ever gave me any information, I mustn't become a competitor of going leeching around, that they would be in their way. But they were good to me. And St. Clair okayed everything that I wanted, and I was very close to St. Clair Oil and Gas Company. He wasn't a man that, he was kind of a bull, if you want me to tell you. You see, he started a ball club, the third against the other two clubs at one time. Harry St. Clair did. That didn't last but a few years, but he sold all the players and to the other league.
Something else I wanted to ask about Mr. Gant. During the 30s, a group known as the Pure Oil Company, who they were,
well, they were, you had one of them, Secretary of State at Washington after later days, and I'd like to tell you their names. I met one or two of them. They were three brothers. One of them lived in Chicago, and there were three brothers and a brother-in-law that really started the Pure Oil Company. And they came south in Texas and Louisiana and got in on some of those very early foods, and then they got nationwide.
Well, what I had in mind was the time that Harry F. Sinclair and this group known as the Pure Oil Company leased up, I venture to say, a couple of 100,000 acres in eastern Marshall County and western Bryan County. And they got the production, but I don't recall there was any vast amount. Do you remember any of the details?
No, I do not. I remember when they made a sludge, but they did not make a success in their venture.
Very limited, as I recall.
You got your first coup in Marshall County along the falls with about 1,400 feet that did make money. The man who made some money called it the pot of gold. I know that he's in Iowa, but they did not build up their company, the Pure, out of that deal tremendously, I'll say that. But they were big people, the Pure Oil Company men. One of them was the Secretary of State for several years, and I know they lived in Chicago and had a bank there. And after they finally, after they carried it 25, 30, 40 years, they finally sold that out as they got older. They didn't seem to have of their family sons enough of them to take over.
Sure.
Take it through. But they were pretty good men, though.
Well, they spent lots of money in that area.
That's in Bryan County and
Eastern Marshall County and western Bryan County. They had huge tracts because I recall a night in Dan Stewart's abstract office in Durant, and each man was brought in. This was for Pure. And there was a stack of greenbacks, some small and some high, on a desk back there. And they take the owner of some land back there and pay him in greenbacks, and he'd sign the lease, and he'd go out the door counting his greenbacks. And that went on for over 2 hours there one night, within my knowledge. And the following day, why, Sinclair had got 10,000 to 20,000 acres under one lease. That was about the limit of my knowledge, but I don't know how much money was paid out that night there at Dan Stewart's abstract office.
Pure, got off the hump that Seminoles. They had to do with that a lot with that first row in seminary. That big Wilcox play. They made lots of fortunes. The Chicago Oil Company, you know, they produced 50,000 barrels a day. Because they did that stand in New Jersey. And,
Well, you made mention once of having some sort of a transaction with a group, and the Mellons in Pittsburgh were primarily responsible.
well, that's the Gulf Oil
That's
Company.
Gulf Oil Company. Andrew Mellon and Associates.
Andrew Mellon, that Mellon family, they control that, and they still control it.
Well, they still do.
Yes, they control it. But Andrew Mellon was Secretary of Treasury.
Yes.
But he was, that family were the Gulf Oil Company. And that means that they operate in this state under the name of they don't operate as the Gulf. Here they operate Mr. Mary Doan. Well, at least about two of them, 100% subsidiary of the Gulf. In this country in Kansas. And this man built the pipeline from down at Port Arthur to Tulsa. Mr. Mary Doan for the Gulf. Of course, the Gulf is still one of the great ones. It's comparable to the Standard. And the Standard, New Jersey, the biggest branch.
Well, now, some of these present names here in 1974 taken on countenance that evidently are absorption of something else. For instance, the word Exxon suddenly shows up.
Well, that's the Humboldt.
That's Humboldt.
They changed the name, had their name changed here about 8 years ago. From the Humboldt, there was an infringement there of the Standard of Indiana on something, and that's the way they settled that.
That was reason for the change of name. I didn't know. Is that Rockefeller family?
Rockefeller's credit for all of the Standard group, but you had your Judge Landis, I'd like to say his name, at Chicago, who broke up the Standard back in 1915, we'll just say, and broke it up into 9 different companies. So you had Standard of Kansas, Standard of Texas, the Standard of, no, not Standard of Texas, the Standard of Kansas, and the Standard of New Jersey, and the Standard of New York, and the Standard of
Indiana.
Yes, that gets up to Chicago, that country. They broke them up into 11 parts, and on the theory that the slave trade, that they were on that law. And now Rockefeller stayed. He might have to change directors to comply with this breakdown. But Rockefeller's family, they're still in. That's where the great fortune, old John D. I mustn't say that I knew him. I've met the Rockefeller that died over at
Winthrop.
Winthrop. I met him. But he's been over in Arkansas, you know, for quite a good many years. That is following a marriage that broke down. He came to this country. And then you have your other Rockefeller in Washington. That,
Governor of New York.
Then his boys they're doing a lot on that great estate.
Well, this Rockefeller Foundation, I believe you told me once that you had some knowledge of that.
Well, I was just my environment brought into it, and I was in that great center at Washington that they built it one time there, and I met Winthrop, and I met the one up there. Yes, but old John D. I like to tell this about him, because he was raised a Baptist, and I'll say he tithes from the time he's a boy. When he worked in the store, $5 a month, a young fellow. His mother taught him to tithe, and he never did quit it. But if he's going on train tip, he just tipped you 10 cents. but he might take the whole train in, officials. Now his office would often follow up and send some more money, hotels or anything, but he would only tip 10 cents.
That was his limit.
That was his limit. But he had all new dimes.
Yeah, he did that all the time, even over in Hawaii, didn't he? There was a special on that on television. And,
That's right.
10 cents was all he had with him.
So you have new dimes every time. I guess. But he was a grand man at that. They did business at a time that you could run your competitor out, and there's no doubt he'd get ruthless. If somebody put in a filling station close to one of theirs, they could break that. They kept the price on theirs so cheap that the other fellow lose money. And but I'll say that he had lots of vision, and he started from nowhere, and he built it into 100. Well, Center, New Jersey is your biggest one, and that gets into $1 billion a year income.
Couple of dimes, shiny ones. And and I'll say that you had a man, Truett, who was president or preacher of the First Baptist Church in Dallas all of his life after finishing Baylor. And he came from a little town right across the river with a little pack. What he had in it was in that little sack that he had carried on his shoulder. His mother did put a jar of preserves or something in, and she always sent him. And he just kind of batched and did anything he could to get through university, and then he became the first preacher of the First Baptist Church and stayed till he died. And I say he's one of the great men of all time. What was the man's name?
Truett.
Truett.
Truett, Truett. And he's dead now.
You've known a vast quantity of fabulous people.
Well, I'd say the other fellows made my environment. Other people, they've been good to me, and I did get acquainted with a lot of people in life, and I got acquainted with practically all the Standard Oil companies, and I traded with them because I was never a moneyed man, and I had Sinclair as a partner up here at Fox, and I've had the Magnolias partners, and they've let me operate. And I've had the Old Prairie Oil and Gas, the Carter Oil Company, and I like to tell a story. I'm not trying to put this in, but the Carter Oil Company is 100% subsidiary of the Standard New Jersey. It was brought from Indiana to this country, to Tulsa, we'll say, in 1914. And in the meantime, the Sun Oil Company was started because the Pugh family, that's J. Edgar Pugh, who created the Sun Oil Company, for his brother and brother's family. They were shipbuilders, they were shipgoers of the world. And when the Spindletop well came in, the first one, 1900, that darn well made 25 or 30,000 barrels a day. They couldn't shut it in because that pipe was not cemented, and if they'd just shut it in 1 minute, they'd taken that pipe right up through the there. And they built tanks over all the teams they could get in the country. And they had 1 million barrels of oil in pits around before, and this man, they shipped them to people. His son-in-law got to be the big manager after his father-in-law died, and he sent his brother, young brother, down there to buy oil. And they were the first people to get away from coal bunkers and go to burning oil for heat
in the boilers.
In the ships, yes, in the boilers. And he went down there and he brought 1 million barrels of oil out of those pits for 7 cents a barrel, 1900. And out of that life the Sun Oil Company was born by J. Edgar Pugh, the brother, and then we had the Twin State, which we still do in this country, 100% subsidiary of the Sun. It was under just Mr. Pugh. When his brother died, why, that left him under, in a measure, his two nephews. And he kind of thought they were upstarts. Maybe they did rub it in. And he quit that company in 1914, and he's the first man that I ever met to make $50,000 a year salary. And he brought the Carter Oil Company for the Standard, New Jersey, to Tulsa from Indiana. And he spent $200 million of Standard's money in 2.5 years buying. Oil was done 30 cents a barrel in this part of the state, he was in another, 40 cents a barrel at Cushing. And he bought properties, and he bought oil and storage for the Standard, New Jersey, and spent that $200 million. And while he had geologists, but he was a man that I tell you, he could hardly wait for anybody to help him. And first time I ever traded with Mr. Pugh, I forgot that he was a president and a big man and busy as Dickens and had 5 or 6, 7 landmen. And I went to the desk, and the girl that asked me who cared to see, I said, I'd like to see Mr. Pugh, the president. And I was just ignorant enough to think as the place starts, it would stop.
Well, it should have been.
Instead of his turning me over to 1 or 2 landmen, he told her over the phone, their connected phone, he said, tell him that I'll be through this conference 15 minutes, 20. And there I went in to see him, and wonder I hadn't gotten flushed just a little bit. But but he accepted me. He's a man that you could feel at home with. And I know I sold him a lease for $10 an acre, 160 acres over next to Stevens County, at west of Tulsa. Exactly. And I caught him. He did this to me. He said, "Are there any dry holes? Tell me what's around that fleet." Well, I did know, and told him. And I was always prepared every time I ever made a trade to know everything in the world about around me that was selling him. And then 15 minutes I could make a sale with him. And that lasted through life. He stayed with Standard, New Jersey until 1917, and he evidently got homesick for his big thing and for the Sun Oil Company that he had nurtured, that he had really made for them. And the boys evidently, these young men, they evidently decided they needed him. So he goes back and he moves the Sun from down South Texas to Tulsa, the head offices.
West Tulsa.
Yes, and he took charge again, and I went on through with him down there, and I could call him and tell him that I'd go over everybody's head, always with Mr. Pugh. And I'd call him when he went back to Sun, Dallas, and I could tell him that I wouldn't get in there till 4 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd learned to know him so well. And he might be sitting there with his overcoat on going to play golf, but he'd wait. And then I know he got that, he went up to Philadelphia to the head office and lived the last 2 years. And I was in Washington. And I called him up there. And I said, Mr. Pugh, I want to come up to Philadelphia because I'm going to want to borrow some money. And he said, when can you get here, Walter? And I said, I can get there by 11 o'clock Saturday morning. I didn't take into consideration that's almost a holiday. And when I got up there's 2 sons who were up 50 years old apiece, waiting with him for me. And they took me to dinner. And I borrowed that $150,000 all right that day.
Oh, boy.
Pretty good sized loan.
But he was a man that would make decisions, and I think he was a man that grasped all the facts easy. One of the greatest traders I ever knew, and could do it with less effort. And you had a man of Magnolia that I always said was one of the great ones of all time, as a Mr. Faulkner. The Standard of New Jersey brought into the Magnolia. Magnolia was created down here below Dallas, 60 miles, by local men. And that 700-foot production came in at 1900, by the way. And the local men, they built a little refinery. They called the refinery Magnolia Petroleum Company, and they called their production Corsicana Petroleum Company. And Magnolia, yes. And they moved into Dallas and grew, and I believe in 1910, the Standard of New York put in, I don't know how many millions of dollars. And they sent two men to, one was Mr. Faulkner, and the other was, I know he's bald-headed, he's just plain as a dickens. He part his hair way down here to get some hair over his head. And all
There's 3 hairs across.
he might not have over 4 hairs, but he got them all the way down here. Oh, he had more than that, of course. But he's a good man. And we wanted to sell some Duncan properties. Well, first I went down there and I borrowed $150,000 down there in Magnolia. Now we were running some oil for up at the Duncan country. I went down to Mr. Faulkner, and I'd never met the treasurer, and you didn't have to have a board meeting those times. So Mr. Faulkner had told him what I wanted. He said, Walter, let's go up and see Mr. Proctor. He was the treasurer. Went up and Mr. Proctor treated me awfully good, but he said, Walter, when can you come back here? I said, I can come back here Saturday. I was from the Rangers. We were going to some oil down there. And he said, fine, I'll be here. And what I think he did, he didn't know me well enough to know to answer me that he just handed me
cash on the spot.
And he just put me off to see when I could be back there. And so I came back and went to Mr. Faulkner, and we went up to see Mr. Proctor. Mr. Proctor said, Walter, we didn't say anything about interest. I said, no, I wasn't thinking too much about interest. I knew it'd be, well, he said, would 5% be too much? I said, well, of course not. And so I borrowed that $150,000 and started a deal over at the northeast, over in the other township east there. We were drilled about 7 wells on 7 different properties over there. And in the deal, we were getting into a program that was going to take money. And so I picked up that check for that $150,000. Well, here at the Ardmore deposit. But I did tell Miss Faulkner, I said, Miss Faulkner, this is going to take us out of a temporary type, all right. But we've got such a program on that I'm not sure what we ought to sell a property. And he said, well, Mr. Little, who's president, is in New York, and I do not